been a judge that tried patent cases in the federal court and having represented both plaintiff and defendants in patent cases in federal court, including the company that I now work for as the general counsel. And I think we have to raise the debate, because if we stay just in what the patent law says and how we got there that it says it, and if we stay just about a general discussion of the public good, we will miss, I think, the Commerce Clause implications. And this is by analogy, but it's constitutional analogy on purpose of what we're doing here. And the other thing I think that's important is that we in the United States most assuredly have faced these issues time and time again and done it very well. We have been through environmental rights. We have been through water rights. We have been through how you decide who has land and gold and silver and mining claims and everything else that involved a commercial public good decision and a private access decision over and over and again historically. The difference is this time we have both a new player, and you can either call them an ally or not, called the United States Patent Office. And they have a particular way of looking at the world. And so they count a lot in how this is debated. But if you think about it, if you raise what I'd like to encourage you to do is think about it as a commercial clause issue that has economic, public good, public policy, division of natural resources issues, and let's take and make sure we keep our eye on the history agenda here. And not just say it's about the here and now. It is about our history and how have we handled these issues on a constitutional basis. And it's also about the future. And that's where this debate gets very difficult also. I'm a part of a company where we have 900 people. We have a very remarkable business cap, and you can check it out any day you want on the, in the market, but it hovers close to $1 billion. So we are successful, I think. It would be a fair way to say it. All the people in our company, at least 800 of us, do nothing but think about the science issues, day in and day out. So because of what we do, which I will get to in a minute, we see both the research side and the commercial side in bold relief, and we're glad of it. And that's why we come to this debate, I think, with different credentials, with different interests, and I just want to fully disclose them to you, and with a hope that we can get a debate going in the academies, in Congress, about how are we going to referee, and I use referee wisely, and promptly, this issue about the commerce on the genome, because we need all the help we can get, we who are in the private sector. And I will say the same is true for the research sector, whether you're in the private side or in the public side. And one of the things we did, actually right before I came here for this conference, Affymetrix sponsored a debate in Washington, D.C. at the Wilson Center on this same issue. And on the panel we had Eric Lander, who's obviously a very well-known researcher from the Whitehead Center, director of the Whitehead Center, Q. Todd Dickinson of the Patent Office, Scott Brown, who is the general counsel of Millennium, a very influential research company in the United States, and Pilar Osorio, who is a very, very well-thought professor of law in both intellectual property and philosophy of law and is very interested in this issue. And we put that debate together simply for the purpose of letting everybody take a look at how many issues are really involved in this. And it is something that we're going to have to face more and more as we go downstream, which I hope I can illustrate with a couple of case studies for you, which, the story isn't finished yet, but it will illustrate for you some of the problems we're starting to face. For us, this is how, in 1991, this is a Science article, and this is what we started, the microarray technology. And as somebody said to me when I came in the room just a little while ago, oh, yours is the thing they always put in pictures of research regarding cancer. And I said, that's absolutely correct. There are a number of microarrays. They do a number of different things, but we have what's called the gene chip. And we do microarray research. We design it, we collaborate, we cooperate, we publish data. One of the things we do is that we take all the data that's published by any researcher that uses our gene chip, which is our product, which we have patents on, and we put it on the World Wide Web. And we do it in English. We're trying to get the ability to to translate to Spanish and at least 1 or 2 other Asian languages, but it's more difficult than it sounds when you have such highly technical papers. So that's one of the ways we start with this. We also publish on the web all of our probe sequences that we use in microarrays. Now, what's the importance of that? This goes to the trade secret point I think that people were talking about earlier. There came a time when we could have kept exactly what we put on this chip a secret. And for a long time, we did. And we don't have patents on all of the probe arrays. But we made a conscious decision to publish it and not keep it a trade secret. And the reason we did that is we felt that the research engine was going to run better if people could validate, if they could put in the footnotes to their scholarly papers exactly what probes they had used and why they had used them and why they had chosen them. And the only thing we asked was for a copy of the paper so that we could put it on the web, and permission, of course, we all being some lawyers here anyway, to put that paper on the web. And it has been profoundly successful, not only in encouraging people to use, and let me just give an analogy here, our microscope for looking at the genome, but also encouraging people to have an incredibly lively debate about how you really set up these experiments. Now, we could have made a number of other choices coming from an economic analysis that would have been both respected, properly legal, and we chose not to because we tried to keep our eye on what is coming downstream in the research field. And we did that very vocally and on purpose, and so far our experiment has worked phenomenally well. Not all people publish their probe sequences. Not all people publish papers about their research either, and this is not meant as a criticism of anyone. It is just simply another way to look at the economic capitalist argument about trade secrets and patents. And it's not that you're going to fail if you don't keep it a secret, especially on the commerce of the genome, is what I would submit to you. So there we are in 1991. Now let me just put this up. I'm just going to give you a little primer because you're going to say, well, how could this possibly be as big a deal as you're seeming to make it out? We take sequence selection. We create what is called a mask. This is exactly the way they make chips for computers as well. So instead of having to spot down a sequence on any kind of medium you want to spot it on, a gel, a slide, whatever it is, we simply create the mask by using photolithography. What we do is we lay down one layer, computer layer of parts of a probe. Then we protect or deprotect with chemicals based on what we need to do. And then we put down layer after layer until we build a chip that meets either a researcher's design by custom or one that we think is appropriate because of our own researchers internally. And we do that for human genome, mouse, rat, and a number of plants. And we have made special custom chips, for example, for cancer research. Now, our ability to do this, and then there's the array right there that you usually see in pictures. That's the gene chip array. Now, what this does is means we have a plant that if we get 150 custom orders for gene chip arrays, we can do them in a matter of 15 or 20 minutes. So we can build what used to take a PhD researcher, and for those of you who are here who remembered how we used to do it, what would take you hours, weeks, we can do in 15 minutes at 30,000 separate places. Okay, so 30,000 separate probes can be on the same chip. And it doesn't have to be a different probe in every spot. You could have, an experiment down in the left-hand corner and an experiment going in the right-hand corner, and then you cross-check them. I go into this detail to give you a sense of the power of what you can now do automatically with various ways of building arrays. We like to say, a researcher can do in a half an hour, and usually that includes prep time, what it used to take 30 PhDs 3 months, just to give you a view of the science that's possible here. Now, what that means to the rapid development of commerce on the human genome, only people with perfect 20/20 future vision are going to be able to tell. And the reason I say this is because the debate we have today over property rights, over access, may indeed unintentionally influence the rapidity with which we reach some of our research goals or our health delivery goals. Now, why do I say that? There is a timing to these things that's just incredibly exquisite that we've never really experienced with the genome before. I mean, 2 years ago, We didn't have it sequenced. We thought there was a lot more. Now people are talking about 30,000, or you hear different things. The next thing is going to be a transcriptome map. And after that, we're going to differentiate patterns of proteins. Now, you could say, well, if each of that takes a year, what's the harm of making a misstep in how we allocate the property or the legal things? That is not what it's going to take. I mean, the cures, the cancer research are going to take a long, long time. The drug development may take a long time simply because of the quality of the work that has to go into that clinical development. But the baseline research, which is impacted, and there's been quite a bit starting to be written about that, by who owns the gene. If somebody owns the gene, a particular gene, let's just call it gene A now, and they have it, and they have an exclusive license, and you can't get a license for it, you risk a lawsuit if you research on it. So you either go and buy the license, or you risk the lawsuit. Or if you're in a university, you say, well, we have the research exemption, and you hope that it's true. And you hope that it stays true, because it's certainly not codified. But that's what you do. Now, let's say you have found a very remarkable result from a confluence of 2 or 3 genes, but one is owned by somebody. What do you do about that? You have you have the right to do 3/4 of the experiment, but not the last 1/4 of the experiment. What if 3 of the 4 genes are owned by somebody? You have to go get licenses from each of those individuals. Now, somebody might say, well, that's the price of the patent system, and that's certainly a fair comment. But what I'm posing to you is that companies can make the money, the innovation can be encouraged, the research will occur, the funding will happen, if we really patent tests, a particular test, a particular therapeutic protein, or a particular method of approaching a clinical experiment, and don't do it at the genetic level. It is another way of looking at the issue. Now, why is timing important in this? We've just gotten, as everybody's talked about a little bit earlier, they have new rules for utility in the patent office, and we're just starting to see the impact of that. But there are patents, and they are grand-personed in, and they do exist, and it's constitutional, and it's purely legal. To test those patents in the court system, let's just run out a typical patent case. Let's say that the utility factor hasn't been properly fulfilled there. To test those patents in a court case, first you take 2 years to warm up to a trial. And that's kind of fast these days. And then whatever happens, happens. And then it's 2 years to warm up to a federal circuit appeal. And then it's about, after you hit that stage, it's another year approximately before you get a result. So now we're at 5 years. And then if people want to appeal to the United States Supreme Court, and this is certainly a subject that has historic importance, they might be interested, they might take it, then you add another year. So in 5 years, you may get a clarity on whether this ownership issue is here, there, or somewhere else. And I'm posing the issue to everyone here that if we defer, or if people are chilled from doing some research in one of these genes because of an ownership claim, it will have public impact, and it will be dramatic. Now, let me show you how it affects our business, and you'll see it right away. We have just come out with a product that's called the HU133. It's the whole genome expression analysis. We can put a whole human genome on a set of 2 chips, 1 million features. Now, the reason why this is important is it's important for people to have the whole genome functional analysis available. And it's when you're in the early stages, you're looking at what is the relationship between the genes that might be impacting a particular disease. Now, let's just posture that of those 33,000 genes, 15,000 are owned by somebody. Possible? Applications are rolling through, or somebody thinks they own a part of a gene that's on there. Now, we have 2 ways to go. We use a public database, which is the choice we have made. Thank you, Blair and Clinton. Okay, I'm just going to stand up here and say thank you. I'm in the private sector. We make money. It is our business. And I think they did us all a tremendous service in the research industry by taking the position they took. Thank you, NIH, for having a public database. because we would not make these chips. And we would not be able to do this research if it weren't for that. And I say it this bluntly to you because I think sometimes people think the private sector goes all one way on this issue, or all universities go all one way on this issue, and I don't think that's accurate, and I recommend the Newfield report to get the nuances of how the science relates to the public policy and to the legal issue. So for us, we see it very important to research as well as to a type of research, which is you take the whole genome or large sections of the genome and look at all of it together. Now, the other thing that you need to think about also is the power of refining the definition of disease. For years, we've said, well, there's leukemia, there's heart disease, there's lung cancer, there's, breast cancer, there's whatever there is. And now, because of genomic analysis, we are challenging whether those diseases are, in fact, archetypes that are based on assumptions because we didn't have a good enough microscope to look. And one of the biggest examples is the research that's been done in leukemia. I mean, it is truly remarkable. Where we thought there was 2 kinds of leukemia with 2 different kinds of treatment, and the way we differentiated it was we looked in a microscope at cellular structure, which took tremendous expertise, tremendous time, and the slightest misread was the difference between getting an entirely different kind of chemotherapy and one that had a tremendous morbidity effect. Well, the research that was done with chips and genetic, now we know there is at least 3 types of leukemia. They require different chemotherapy. It's going to make, everyone believes, a big change in the morbidity rate from these kinds of leukemia. And the last thing is there's probably more like 10 different types of leukemia that will be treated differently. And this is dramatic, it is groundbreaking, it is genomic research, it needs to be put out there in commerce. And I think it's a good example of if somebody had owned and wouldn't let out, and that's an assumption, I understand licensing is the deal here, those genes so that they could be looked at the whitehead, then we wouldn't know that that disease construct was in fact not accurate. And we're going to change in the midterm the way diseases are approached because of this genetic microscope. And that's why I say the commerce has got to be to let the genes be out there for everyone to have a look at. People should patent and should own different types of tests, different types of proteins, different therapeutic effects, different type of clinical process. Absolutely, that's what the patent system is for, and the money will follow. If you agree with that hypothetical, the money will follow to that part of the research. And what about the trade secret part, which I think in fairness is a very good argument Scott Brown makes for Millennium. If you don't let us have patents and own the process, we'll have to go underground and keep it secret. And I will just say, I think what we will see, because of the construction of the research, and because we're going to be striking down old ideas as we go along, like the construct of what is a particular disease, we are going to see that people will want to put out not their secret process, but their research, so that people will follow on to the test or whatever product or method they are developing. And it's a different view of the commerce of the genome, but I think we have to let the science really start refining how we look at this commerce. And it shouldn't be just an economic discussion based on what we know now, because we have no idea where this genomic research is going ultimately. Now, let me just do another piece, an interim piece I think you might find interesting. Pharmaceutical companies, obviously, in clinical trials, which are very expensive, would like to sort out who should be in and who should be out of the clinical trial based on genetic research. Because if you could find out that there was a tox effect to drug A before you went into majorly expensive clinical trials, in other words, you could sort for who you didn't want in the clinical trial, so you could really see what a drug's ability to help a patient was, you would have a more successful clinical trial. People argue that it might be actually less expensive in the long run. But if you don't have the freedom to commerce the whole genome, when you're looking at these individual patients and see where the tox effect might be, what you are going to be doing is pumping back in the cost of those expensive trials into the clinical genomic screen that precedes the clinical tests. And that research is going to really have to be shared to have any value to a number of companies. So the trade secret issue, although you'd like to say I can keep it secret and be ahead of everybody else, is probably not what is going to be the stake in the ground that we're all going to pay attention to. And let's face it, tox effects of drugs going before the FDA, I mean, there's been research published on this, but it's anywhere from 20% to 40% of the drugs that had to be removed from the market were removed for tox effects. Now, what if you could figure that out genetically before you hit clinical trials? I mean, the impact on the cost of drugs, the delivery of drugs, and clinical trials would be nothing short of dramatic in the interim of 10 years. Meanwhile, 5 years go by while we're trying to gear up for these things where we decide who owns what and whether utility is proper. So from a public good timing question, with this kind of research power, I just present to the group, it's a much more serious issue than do you like patents or do you not? And I will tell you that I come from a company, we love patents. Country too, we love patents here in the US, in case anybody missed that. But we at Affymetrix just got the award from MIT. Every year they give an award in biotechnology to the company with the most quality patents. And there's a factor of 100 different reasons why you have a quality patent or not. Well, we just got the award for being number one. So we are patent people. We believe in patents. We believe that you should have a right to have a patent. We believe in the financing of patents. I just want to get that clear, before you start thinking, where is she coming from? Anyway, we believe there's a different issue when you look at the commerce that the human genome provides. And we have to look at it the same way the US looked at great rivers and how you travel down them, how you award certain rights, and where you go from there. So that's our perspective, and we are taking a very public position on it because we think it should be debated. And I agree with one of the speakers who said, wherever we end up, it's probably going to be better than where we are now, because the debate has already changed some of the rules at the PTO, and we need to move further on this and get more people involved in the debate. One of the things I think out of this list I just want to mention to you is that genomic research is in its early stages, and so then how you patent is critically important because it's more of a gate against as well as for private investment. And that's what we have to think about. That's a gate that it can let you out down the private investment, or it'll keep you away from a particular type of research. Whole genome analysis tools are just now being commercialized. And that's important too, because when we used to say, one gene at a time is important, I mean, that was the construct. We're not saying that anymore. We're saying groups of genes are important. The whole genome together being looked at is important for research purposes. And when you look at it from that perspective, then patents in commerce take on a different function, and it has to be examined. The other thing is everybody is saying the data that is coming out of this genomic research is so huge it is going to have to be shared in order to have value. The bioinformatics of all of this genetic research, you can't really do it on your own just because there is so much going on worldwide and there is so much going on company to company that the bioinformatics section of this is going to make the whole trade secret debate less important. Your process may be a secret, but not what you find about the genome, or you will be left behind. I talked about the application in pharmaceutical development is underway, and there's a couple of really current examples on it. Now, the proof of principle for clinical genomics is what I think is so problematic for, and understanding it really creates problems with this who owns the genome debate. First of all, you have to have large-scale validation. And so that involves sharing information and having broad access to all the genes in the genome, or all the proteins, or whatever it is. If you create a patent thicket so that it costs 1% every time you do a piece of research, or somebody wants to grab back to 1% of your products, it becomes prohibitive because you don't have a product to sell yet. You're in the research phase. And that is what I call is the problem of commerce on the genome. Not who owns it, but how are we going to create a good commercial model that works on this particular resource? Data sharing is critical, and we're going to have to look at how you do that, why you do that, what are the algorithms that explain it, and those are all things that are going to have ownership capability to them, so there's a way to make money there. I think the other important thing to remember, and I just put these two up because we don't have time to talk about them today, is oncology research is now being coordinated worldwide. There is no doubt about it. And if we live in the most restrictive patent setting in the US, I believe that our research facilities will be left behind because people will do that research in places where the patent system is more conducive to open commerce on the genome. And then the research will come back, and the products may be made here, or they may be made somewhere else. On the idea of malaria research, this is an issue that's come up because it's a patent thicket example, and I commend to you, if you have time, to take a look at it. But there were 7 different patents on the particular genetic material that may or may not be good for a malaria vaccine. And I bring this up because it's an issue that is not a US issue, but it very much may be driven by patents that some are in the UK and some are in the US. And one of the things that any researcher's got to do who's going to work on malaria vaccine is got to figure out how to put those patents together, how to get the appropriate license, and it's an example of a thicket that you have to navigate. Now, thickets are usually cured by pools. And that is something that you don't hear people talking about very much except in the computer industry or, the DVD pool. There's a number of examples of them. But one of the things we have to think long and hard about, and I know the NIH and the Department of Justice and the Patent Office have come up and talked about this, but we've not really seen a lot of commercial movement in the area of pooling for the purposes of expanded research or expanded commerce on the genome. And how do you do that, and who runs it, and who's in it, especially at this early stage, are not small questions. But one of the things that might work is NIH could run the patent pool that would allow navigation of the genome. And then a fair price would be set for access. The tax would be the same for everybody, and we all move on down the commerce stream. It's something that could be thought about and could be examined. I'm just going to ask these 3 policy questions. Patents on DNA sequences continue to be justified in the research context of current technology. Are gene patents necessary for successful innovation in healthcare? And I want you to just sort of take this as a case study. I want you to think of every company that you know of. Have they just relied on their gene patents to make a successful innovation, or have they done more? And if you look at that study from a case history point of view, you'll see that innovation has followed the good research and the good products and the good tests, not necessarily back up at the gene patent level. Should the government mediate between commercial interests and access to DNA research for citizens? And this was alluded to earlier in terms of who's in the debate. Right now, the Patent Office is in the debate, Congress is in the debate, scientists are in the debate, and companies are in the debate. But healthcare providers will very soon be in this debate. And one of the big examples, whether you agree with gene patenting or not, a BRCA test in Europe costs $1,100. A BRCA test in the United States, a screen test for breast cancer, costs $2,480. Why is there a differentiation? What is the patent role of it? And there was just an opposition filed to the BRCA patent yesterday, or day before yesterday, in Europe. And one of the big claims is not only the utility argument, the novelty argument, all of the things that have been talked about, but that there is a cost issue with this test that is limiting other tests that can be developed. So there's no competition for a test. You have to send all of your samples back to a lab, a particular lab, to get them done. So nobody can validate, nobody can expand the test, nobody can develop a new test. And what a number of countries in Europe are saying is that they may have to take over this particular patent for the common good in order to get the research done. Now, one of the things I don't want to have happen because of the way we look at patents and where we place the patent bar is for countries to decide that if you have a patent and somebody needs it for research, we're just going to turn it into a public good argument and we're going to draft it right into free access. That would be bad for everyone. We also don't want to have too many Tony Blair, Bill Clinton announcements for the reason that it is traumatic to the market. I'd rather have some more predictability in the system that really pays attention to healthcare delivery costs. And one of the ways you could do it is say, you can patent a specific test based on a gene, but you can't own the gene. There's not enough novelty, there's not enough utility. But if you've got the best test, not the first test, but the best test, the test that's economically viable, that can be validated, that makes sense for the disease it's supposed to be predicting, and we're a long way from that, then you win and you make money, whoever you are. And that's a different way of looking at it. It's not just upstream and downstream. It's saying what are the products and what is going to make a difference in healthcare delivery. These are the big questions. Who owns it? Who controls it? And who can monetize it? And I just like to add the question we ought to take a look at it is how are we going to run commerce on the genome? This is not just about the first two questions. It's much more than that. I was going to do a little bit of talk about chakra body, but I know I'm running out of time. I haven't seen the sign go up. Did the sign go up? Oh, okay. But let me just say, a lot of people go back to, gee, the Supreme Court said we could do this, right? And so that's why we do it. And I'm enough of a lawyer, and I was a judge for a while. I really read all those Supreme Court cases. I mean, I went back to the first book and started reading there. It was something I like to do. I like to read the law. And I appreciate it's a little old-fashioned, but you know, it served the American justice system relatively well for a few years. And so I just commend to you to go back and really read Chakra Body. I mean, it's worth it. First of all, it's 5'4". It's 1980. Interesting how much the world has changed since 1980. And here's what they're saying. We give you a patent, Chakra Body, for the particular bacteria because it's human-made, genetically engineered bacterium. And it's an invention. It was bacteria that ate oil spills. And we were very lucky to have it. But they actually genetically altered the bacteria to have it eat the oil spills. And that is not the case that I would say stands for the proposition that you can patent a particular gene even if you distill it. It just doesn't come out of that case as a matter of law. It's an interesting point in history, but I think the Supreme Court needs to take a look at that. I'd rather avoid that, too. I'd rather have this particular debate we're having go on in Congress and in the Patent Office and be settled so we don't have to wait 5 years for a case-by-case picking apart of the commerce on the genome, because it's not going to be good for anybody economically, I don't think, or for the greater number of us who are in this business. We've had explosive growth in patents. We have a threefold increase in patents litigation since Chakra Body. So there's a cost to what we're doing here. Here's my arguments against the gene patents. Is basic research enabling them was underwritten by public expenditure, and as such, they should be publicly available. Untested broad claims that inhibit downstream development and basic research mean they shouldn't exist, and it compromises patients and research access, because it's never going to be single gene diseases or single gene abnormalities that we're going to care about. It's going to be multigenic, and 9 times out of 10, more than one person is going to own the patents that are in the multigenic analysis, and it will slow down the research. Genes are information. They are not matter when you look at it from the whole science philosophy point of view. I'd like to build a commerce clause for the genome, a particular kind. We need it. Stop future patenting of gene sequences. Raise the patent standard to promote greater access to genomic research. And what do I mean by that? Theoretically possible should not equal utility under 101. For people here who love the patent law, that's my position. It ought to be specific, substantial, provable use, and not just theoretically possible that this gene relates to that disease. Legalize the research exemption. And I think we ought to write it down and give everybody the protection it deserves. Pool essential patents and require non-exclusive licenses for publicly funded research. That is, if you get a patent as a result of having publicly funded, you can't exclusively license it to somebody else. It can only be non-exclusive. Thank you.
We'll take questions after all three speakers. The next speaker is Lila Feisse. She is Director of Federal Government Relations and Intellectual Property at BIO, the largest trade organization representing the biotech industry. BIO members include companies, academic institutions, state biotechnology centers, and affiliated organizations in 50 states and 33 countries. BIO members involved in the research and development of healthcare, agricultural, industrial, environmental, and biotechnology products. Before joining BIO, Ms. Feisse worked for 10 years in the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, first as an examiner and later in management and policy development. Her primary areas of expertise are protein engineering, therapeutics, and assays. She was instrumental in developing both the guidelines for utility and written description and related training materials. She also worked at the NIH and at the National Cancer Institute, Laboratory of Genomics, where she isolated and characterized viral and human oncogenes. She received her BS degree in biology from the University of Virginia and her MS degree in genetics from the George Washington University School of Medicine.
Thank you. I actually have to be really careful what I say because I'm sandwiched between two of our member companies. Both Affymetrix and Genomic Health are members of BIO. So I really have to be careful what I say. I'm walking a very thin line here. Can we pull up the slide? Okay. When I was asked to come and speak here, the question was, what is the perspective of the industry? Bring the perspective of the industry about whether the role of patents in biotechnology. Within, I think, that clause, there was a mention of gene patenting and genes and genomics, so we will address that too. But what I would like to start off saying at this point is that it's very difficult to separate gene patents from patents when it comes to from biotech patents, because right now they're integral. When you think genomics, you think biotech. When you think biotech, you think genomics. We all know that biotech is a broader field, but within it is genomics. So it's very difficult to separate the concept of gene patents from just plain old biotech patents. And the other thing is, I'm actually coming here to you from the industry's perspective, not as a scholar or as a legal expert or as a scientist, not even as a company, because as you will find out, and I'm sure you've heard, every company will have a different business model. What will make one company successful will be to the detriment of another company. The beauty of this system, the country, is that you actually have choices to make, that you can get a patent on a gene, or, if you disagree, not to have a patent on a gene. And if indeed there is problems, there are fora to discuss, to address these issues, but not at the expense of one or the other. So I will talk about what the industry in aggregate will feels or believes about patenting or biotechnology patenting. Anything that you want to know about bio will be found on this website. Let me just tell you that the reason I can stand here and tell you that the industry perspective is that bio has over 1,100 members. You'll find all that information on the website that I have over there for you, along with a lot of different types of statistics. We have over 1,100 members. They are biotech companies, they're research institutions, they're universities, and we have representation in all 50 states, and we also have representations from various different countries as well, 33 countries. We're a trade association, and as such, our mission is really to promote the growth and development of the biotech industry. How do we do that? Well, we listen to what our members say. My role in bio is to sit at a desk in Washington, D.C., and listen to what our members say with respect to intellectual property. I help to develop intellectual property policies and for the industry, and also, where necessary, I help to go out and I promote either changes in legislation, block any legislation that could be detrimental, but I do it because I listen to what the collective industry tells me. I don't get up one morning and go to my desk and say, today I'm going to fight for gene patents, or today I'm not going to fight for gene patents. I will listen and see what the industry has to say. And today, September 27th, 10 till 3, as far as I know, our membership is resoundingly in favor of having, overwhelmingly in favor of having patents on biotechnology inventions, including genomic inventions. So let me just put everything sort of into a context for you. The industry, I'll give you sort of an analogy because I can relate to it. I'm a mother, I have 3 kids, one of my kids is 14 years old. She's an adolescent. If you think about the biotech industry right now being in its adolescence, it is now in a stage where it is enthusiastic, it is aggressive, it's curious. It's the prodigal child, if you will. It is the maniacal genius. If this adolescent is given the opportunity to move ahead, to progress, if it's nurtured, okay, this child or this adolescent will fulfill wonderful promise. Or if it's not given the correct guidance, the correct direction, the correct nurturing, it could be a maniac. Okay? So we have to be very careful. We're right here at the adolescent stage of biotech. Okay? 25 years ago, we had Genentech, we had Amgen. They were starting up. I could count on one hand the number of biotech companies. Today, there are 1,400 biotech companies in this country and abroad. Okay? Those 1,400 companies, what are they doing? They employ 179,000. These are facts. I'm going to just throw numbers at you here. They employ 179,000 people. They generate between $27 to $30 billion a year, okay? And actually, they've jumped from, in the past 10 years, from $8 billion to $27 billion in revenue. They spend over half of the money that they generate in revenues on research and development. It's a very research-intensive industry. Last year, actually in the year 2001, the industry spent over $15 billion on research and development. This small adolescent industry has helped over 325 million people worldwide. Okay? It has more than 132 drugs that can be characterized as biotech on the market. And that's not even counting all the tests, the agriculture. There's the industrial enzymes that you find in your laundry detergent. There's a whole slew of things that are done through biotech. And there's 350 in the pipeline that are actually going through regulatory review right now that within the next 5 to 10 years will be out in the marketplace. Curing or treating what diseases? Alzheimer's, cancers, rheumatoid arthritis, you name it, intractable diseases, okay? In fact, one of the things that the president of Bio made sure that he expressed to the biotech community in our meeting in this past June in Toronto, where there were over 15,000 members of the biotech industry present. One of the things that he said is that we really need to make sure we have a good foreign policy. We need to have a foreign policy as an industry. Early on, we did take on ethics as an issue because we knew by virtue of the fact that our industry is incredibly controversial. I mean, it's very emotional. I'll be the first person to say it. But, you know, at the same time, there's a lot of promise. So we took ethics as actually one of the principles that we have as an industry looks at the ethics of biotechnology. And this past year, our president said that we really need to look ahead and go into the foreign policy, make sure we address those issues. By foreign policy, he meant the diseases, the intractable diseases, or the very infectious diseases that plague countries that are not able to purchase the medicines that we have, that we can create. Malaria, tuberculosis, whatever the diseases that are out there. You know it better than I do. So we are, as an industry, that promise is there, the potential is there, and we'd like to move in that direction. So I guess we'll go back to the question, and I'll repeat this. Do we need biotech patents? And within the context of that, do we need gene patents? As I said, yes, we do. We do need it today. Maybe in 10 years, we might not. Maybe in a few years, it'll be irrelevant what we say today. It's good to have the debate, because this debate, as Barbara has mentioned, is getting people to think. It's getting people to change possibly their business practices. Okay? Debate is good. Talking is good. But beware what you do, what comes out of that action, because you don't want to stunt something that's moving ahead. Okay? And you may not, but just be very careful in this debate to consider all aspects, which I see that you're doing here today by having me present. Okay. This is actually one of the fun charts because, and you've heard actually part of it today, we need, not only do we need gene patents, we need strong gene patents, we need enforceable gene patents, and we need gene patents for a long time. Basically, the point that I'm trying to make by this slide is that by the time you file a patent application, to the time 20 years where you have your market exclusivity, but 20 years is assuming today I file at the patent office, and believe me, I worked at the patent office, I know. You file at the patent office today, and you expect to get your patent today, that gives you 20 years. I'm telling you right now, if you're lucky in the biotech area, you might get your patent in 2 years, if you're lucky. More likely, you'll get it in 4 and 6 years, and it has very little to do with, the patent office not wanting to give a patent out. It really has a lot to do. It's a big resource issue, but that's a totally different subject, and that's actually one of the things that we're working on to try and get patent office the resources it needs to actually give us patents faster, which may be sort of antithetical to what we're talking about here. But basically, what the point that I'm trying to make here is that by the time you file a patent to the time the patent expires, if you're working on marketing a drug, a pharmaceutical drug, you lose between 8 to 12 years. Let me use this fine laser here. You lose between 8 to 12 years in the regulatory review process, in the FDA approval process. Okay, that's on average. They're trying to fix the system. If they fix it, if they make it quicker in the FDA, fine, that's wonderful. But what you're left with, ultimately, the day that you actually get your product and you're able to make large-scale manufacturing of it, you have somewhere between 8 to 10 years of market life. Now, what have you done? You heard this morning that you spent $360 million on getting to that point. But that's one drug, and if you're lucky, that one drug that you've spent $360 million on, which the numbers have changed. Some say $500 million. Some say 800 million. I mean, you can just take the number as high as you want. But anyway, it's numbers that I can't even conceive of in my own mind. That amount of money is for one drug. Now, if you're a biotech company, and let me just tell you that out of the 1,100 member companies that we have, 90% of the companies, okay, 90% of the biotech companies that are our members have not a single product on the market today. They have nothing. They have no product on the market. They're not as lucky as Affymetrix or an Amgen or a Genentech. They haven't gotten there yet. Okay? They like to have it, but they haven't gotten there yet. Those companies rely on patents. That's their patent portfolio. You heard about that this morning. They go to the marketplace. They go to potential investors, and they say, I've got this great idea. I've got these great scientists. And I really want to develop this product, and here's my patent portfolio. It's protection. The investors will then look and give the money, give whatever they think they can give up at the time. So that amount of money you put into it, you have 10 years, okay, to be able to recoup that, if you're lucky. Is that enough? I mean, you just do the math yourselves. I mean, I don't know. Those numbers are way too big, way over my head. I'm not a scholar, but I can just tell you, for me, it seems like it's a lot of money for a short period of time, and it really, those things you need to take into perspective. And the minute you start to talk about, changing the law here, changing the patent law here, doing this or doing that, what happens? Those patents that you're going to the marketplace with to begin to develop the product, those patents become shaky, unpredictable. The minute you said, Clinton Blair, typical, $5 billion in one day. I mean, that's It's an incredible amount of money in one day. Okay? So basically, that is where we are today as an industry. Okay? Industry perspective. I'm not saying anything controversial. You probably were expecting to hear this. And our companies, oops. Oh, well, I guess we can, what I was going to say, maybe I can go back. I've lost my slide. What I was going to say is that patents, that the patents are used for the typical purposes in biotechnology. They use to protect, they stake a claim around an idea, they stake a claim around a product. That's my product. If you get too close, I can sue you, whatever, or if it's an idea, I can sue you, I can block you from using. It's a property. It's a property right that's given, and that's fine. But as I said, not too many of our companies can actually use it to protect a product because they don't have it. They want to protect their idea so that the investor down the road can be fairly confident that, yes, there'll be a product, and that product will be protected, and it's okay. And it'll be a predictable protection. And that's really the bottom line. One other point that I really do want to make here is that it is the notion that biotechnology companies have come out of federally funded research or federal funding is a perfectly valid one. We agree. We agree. We love it. We love the government. We love whatever money can come to us. That is the perfect environment for us. We are the middleman. If you will. We're trying to be big pharma. We haven't gotten there. We haven't grown up yet. We're still adolescents. We want to be able to license technologies from the basic technologies coming out of the laboratories, out of public institutions. We want to take those. We want to be able to bring them to the point where big pharma will pick them up. Okay? And that's the role we have right now for today. In 10 years, our role could be much different. Okay? And in 10 years, I could be standing here telling you a totally different story. But as it stands right now, patents give us that. I call them the linchpin of the industry right now. They need to be strong. They need to be predictable. They need to be there. If I have a patent today, I need to know that the full term of that patent life will be there. Okay? And as I said, I'm not going to be able to distinguish genomic patents from biotech patents. And so when you make assessments or assertions, just remember that when you start to carve little pieces of the patent law out, where do you stop? I hate to use that slippery slope argument, but I will use the slippery slope argument. Who's going to make that judgment, what that line is? And how do you really, it's going to take a lot of time and effort, and by the time you all decide, or we all decide, we'll be way past this debate. And it may be too late, but I don't know. So far, it's been 25 years. I'm not unhappy. I'm feeling like there's things coming out that I could use in the future. I'm happy Affymetrix is there, and I'm happy Genomics, and I'm happy that Cogent is there if I should ever need it to clear my mind. There's definitely, I feel that there's things moving in the right direction. But having said all of that, there are so many different challenges. All of them are touched on here. We have, the ethical challenges. How dare you say you want to own a piece of me? How dare you? That's the ethical challenge. How do you answer that question? The cultural. What is a patent anyway? I'm starving. What do I care if you have a piece of paper? I want to eat, or I'm dying, and I need the medicine. What do I care if you got a piece? It's a culture. What is a patent to begin with? Who cares? The emotional challenges. Okay, stay out of my food. Why do you keep wanting to mess with my food? Why do you want to patent my crops or my cotton or the rice? Who are you to do this? Just stop fiddling with my food. There's a whole host of issues. It's so close to us. We need to address it. Absolutely, we need to address it. And I'm glad I'm here today. I'm glad I get to hear my wonderful companies here presenting their views. And perhaps one day I could be saying a different story. Thank you.
Great. Our final speaker in this panel is Patrick Terry. He's co-founder and director of consumer advocacy and governmental affairs at Genomics Health Incorporated. He's got a unique background for this presentation. He's a parent of 2 children who had a rare genomic disorder, pseudoxanthoma elasticum, and I do know I'm probably the only person in this room who could have pronounced that. Following that diagnosis, except for Patrick, following that diagnosis, they founded PXE International, a dynamic international lay organization that initiates, funds, and coordinates worldwide biomedical research in genomics. He's also co-founder and president of the International Genetic Alliance, which focuses on empowerment, problem solving by networking through the consumer movement, centers of excellence, and high technology with disenfranchised communities and indigenous peoples in third world countries. Thank you.
Thank you. Bear with me for a second to get started. Thank you. I'm going to be trying to weave together a few lines of thoughts and stories here that hopefully I can pull it off and doesn't seem too disjointed. But first off, I'm just a dad. I'm not a scientist. I'm a high school graduate. I'm dyslexic, so learning disabled. So if I pardon any spelling mistakes, but the computer did check the slide presentation. My presentation today, I'm going to go over who I am, some of my perspective and affiliations, because they're varied. The PXE model, which I'll only touch upon, because tomorrow my wife, Sharon Terry, will be talking and elucidating a little bit more about PXE. And PXE means never having to say pseudoxanthoma elasticum. So. I'll talk about modifications of the PXE model and its applications with other communities. I'll touch really quickly on the situation with PXE being a rare disease, but as it applies to common complex disorders, and the phenotype and the biological pathways implications that we're discovering along the way here. I'll touch on patents, benefit sharing, and non-zero sumness. I'll also try to quickly go through the here and now and my ground experience in just being a common man of the commercialization of the genome. 5 years ago, this is what I thought the genome was. For 15 years, I was a construction manager in Boston. I built the biotech infrastructure of Boston and Cambridge. So I managed large union workforces, arguably an uncooperative workforce on difficult projects with unrealistic time scales in the city of Cambridge, which is almost impossible to do anything in Cambridge. So I was perfectly suited with a skill set to come into life sciences. Part of my habitual behaviors is rock climbing, and I think I want to touch on people hate to climb with me and partner with me because I don't know what's difficult. I'm so stupid that I'll just get on anything. So, and I also don't mind complex and uncomfortable situations. So again, that lends to the story that I'll tell here. And one of my mantras is to learn the rules so you know how to break them properly. That's served me well so far. And my perspective today is informed by being a parent of 2 children affected by a rare genetic disease and how we're going to apply the knowledge of genomics and this advancing life science industry to solve my children's condition. And then now the extended family of the thousands of patients we represent around the world. I'm a participant in research. I'm an active researcher now. I'm a founder of an international research enterprise that we support capacity building, fund postdocs, do all kinds of infrastructure support for research around the world. I'm involved with international mentoring now for the consumer movement. I mean, there's a long history in the United States of the health advocacy movement, then the AIDS movement, the breast cancer movement, linking grassroots to a grass tops level of management over specific issues around disease. I'm a co-founder of a biotechnology company, which I'll tell you about. And now I'm a professional advocate. I've left construction, never to go back. So in 1997, my wife and I founded PXE International. It was about the time that PubMed was available. We can get on the internet. We could pull down the 200 articles that had been published over the 105 years since the disease had been described. We could pull out the Merck manual and see our children were going to die before their age of 20, and we could see this disjointed, a common man perspective of a disease, and just seeing this disjointed case study, these conflicting reports over phenotype and disease pathways, and it was a mess. And it just lent itself from a a project management perspective is, this is a project that's absolutely doomed to failure. You're never going to come out of the basement with this, the way science was being applied to pseudoxanthoma elastica. So I developed a project plan. How do we get to a gene to a therapeutic intervention? And I think I want to highlight the point, I'm talking about intervention. I'm not talking about cure, because I think it's human hubris to say that with the knowledge base that we have now about science and biology and genetics and genomics, that we're talking anywhere close to curing disease. So part of the knockoff here was to get to a diagnostic. The diagnostic is a milestone for commercial application, and it has direct linkage to the gene, to the diagnostic analysis of that gene, and then its therapeutic implication. So I disagree slightly with Barbara that the gene, I feel, and patenting the gene could potentially, if efficient systems are there to back this process up, you can get from a gene to a therapeutic based on the gene, based on your patent of that gene. But the gene is, and it's really a so what for a patient population. So what? You have a diagnostic. What does it mean to me? So the correlation and linkage to severity of disease, phenotype, genotype, what's the epidemiological, what's the longitudinal progression of this disease? If I get a diagnostic, what are you going to actually tell me about it? Right out of the gene sequence, you have the pathway knowledge gained of what it's coding for, what the protein does, what it's trafficking through the cell, how it relates to its extracellular environment, and clues into the molecular pathway of this particular cellular exaggeration, which is PXE. So how we attack that is from a multifaceted approach. We created experimental assay systems, cellular modeling systems, animal knockouts to cross-fertilize in a central manner to inform each other quickly and efficiently and how to division workflow, resources, and what made the most sense to get to a rational approach to a disease therapeutic. And now finally, genomics and databases and linked data sets are becoming available now for the consumer. And eventually, between multiplexing and the commercialization and the commoditization of data and genomic information, it's going to become available at someone's desktop. So PXE International set up biorepositories around the world. We decided to do a trust model and build kind of a franchise lab or a franchise science model to work with various academic collaborators that were like-minded thinkers that would accept patients being in the middle of a scientific mix, which is a hard sell. And it didn't fly everywhere. And I have some great stories. If you ever give me a few drinks, we can really have a fun time telling you about some of the nasty situations we've been in as patients trying to be in the middle of a science enterprise. But we launched and organized 56 patient organizations. 9 of them have gone on and become nonprofits in their own nation and doing their own research activities on their own with assistance and guidance from us. We collect thousands of biological samples. We characterize those samples. We standardize the collection and the annotation of those samples. So we initiate, conduct, and fund research under this research consortium that we manage. And again, it's a trust model with both the research community and the patient community, trying to play the Switzerland in the midst of sometimes contentious situations in the midst of a gene hunt and publishing rights and so forth. But ultimately, it's a U.S. perspective that in the context, it's the individual right. And the individual right is what you're managing in the context of a community or a society or a population or a world community. And this is how we're trying to stay focused for autonomy reasons and decision making and how we implement diagnostics and therapeutics and the understanding of the disease and counseling for the disease itself. This I want to touch on. You can look at all of the, I'm sure all the scholars in the room are familiar with the left side panel here. They're well discussed. And I look at them from the right side panel. It's just simple, do no harm, act to the benefit of others, distribute benefits and risks, and respect for autonomy and choices. But the overriding focus for PXE International is a patient focus. It's utilitarian. Yeah, I can't even say the word. It's patient focused, patient driven, and we could really care less about micromanaging the stakeholders' rights. It's a narrow focus to really advance the process here to have an immediate impact on disease and health management. This is a fledgling organization, International Genetic Alliance, which I was named president of, and we're working to coalesce a group of alliances around the world, patient group alliances, to work in a system or an infrastructure for networking, peer-to-peer networking for patients, of what's worked for the PXE model, what's worked for the Juvenile Diabetes Foundation, what's worked for the Psoriasis Foundation, and compare and contrast our models to build an efficiency and a decision tree based on your disease condition, the severity of the disease, the genetic implications of the disease, and really work out a thought or decision process where we can really help advance a patient-centered focus for disease research. And it varies on focus depending on working with the Native American tribes of North America, which I'm consulting for. The idea that they cannot pass to the afterlife if a piece of them exists, if a piece of DNA exists. So to build in the protocol of a death and how the tribe manages the destruction of that sample and so on and so forth. I'm going to leave that not-for-profit, it all sounds really good, you're doing a great job, and a pat on the back to how it's led me to some industry collaborations and some partnerships with Genomic Health. Genomic Health was founded in August 2000 in the midst of the dot-com crash. We're Silicon Valley based, and we were able to raise over $50 million with a very compelling story about the consumer movement and about linkages of targeted therapeutics and genomics. This is the executive team. Randy Scott, who's the founder of Insight Genomics. Insight holds the largest patent portfolio in life sciences around the world. Joff Baker, who is the chief scientific officer at Genentech. Steve Shack, who is the chief scientific officer. The only other person I don't have on here, she was just added, is Kim Popovitz, who is the president and chief operating officer at Genentech as well. Gene Early, who is an organizational consulting person who's really spent his whole career researching this network model phenomenon, and myself. So we have Insight as a equity partner in Genomic Health, and that is more of a gaining access to their patent portfolio, not in an exclusive way, but in the way that it allows us freedom to operate. And the interesting model that Insight had constructed early on about once you join the subscription model, you basically protect one another from lawsuits, that everybody has freedom to operate under non-exclusive circumstances. This here is just to touch on genomics will not change everything, but it will change most things. And it's getting blown out of proportion of actually what it will change and the hype and the expectations that have been set both in the clinical community from a physician basis as well as just the lay public. Genomic Health story is consumer genomics, not clinical genomics, but how are we going to actually apply this to disease conditions and affect people's lives. And Genomic Health is really about trying to put these elements together, biotechnology, bioinformatics, specialized assays, to really apply it to the practice of healthcare. And some of the hurdles we have to get over and manage in the delicate science of a wet lab is good lab practices, good manufacturing practices. How do you take the science and commercialize it and make it reproducible and so forth? Data sets, integrating vast data sets and simplifying what you're actually capturing and analyzing because the data is just so huge and difficult to manage. And then again, the various arrays and assays that are available. And we have a partnership with Affymetrix in some of our product designs, as well as hammering on that technology to reach some of the level of specificity and standards that we want to set. The personalized medicine phenomenon, I think the early market access for personalized medicine will be through the diagnostics and the molecular diagnostics industry. And you're going to, Barbara mentioned some of it with adverse drug reaction monitoring, staging and typing of cancers, theranostics or particular diagnostics linked to a marker that's linked to a therapeutic, molecular knowledge, prognostics, disease monitoring, so like phase 4 clinical trials, disease monitoring, and so forth, and targeted agent guidance. And this story we sold to the venture capital community by way of the Herceptin example, which is a treatment for women with metastatic breast cancer. And the phenomenon of looking at over 150 oncology drugs in development that can be classed as targeted therapeutics, and multiple agents being sent at a variety of targets. But for patients, what's going to matter at the end of the day is what agents are hitting my target or targeting my disease, and what technology is going to link that patient to the wave of targeted therapeutics, or the wave of diagnostic technologies and techniques and tools that will be coming available on the marketplace. So that's the genomic health story. I'm going to transition a little bit back into the PXE International story to touch on PXE International. In the classic sense, if you look at it as a corporate entity, we're a contact research organization. So we built a firewall between the research enterprise and the patient population. So we manage contact, we manage identification of the samples, we manage the sample distribution and so on in a firewall situation. This allows us to build the protections for the research enterprise, eliminate the nasty family studies stuff, the IRB stuff. We handle it all in-house and just basically enable the science to take place as quickly and easily as possible. So anyway, in 1999, we cloned the gene. It turns out to be a gene that we had screened candidates to the counts come home, and it really was, at the end of the day, that we were looking in the wrong direction. It's a sister protein to the cystic fibrosis. It's an integral transmembrane protein that's essential for life. It's conserved for over 3 billion years. Its basic function is to pump a conjugate from inside the cell to the extracellular space. This is a cartoon I draw of the protein itself being assembled and inserted into the cellular membrane, and it's just an active transport channel between the cell. The phenotype for pseudoxanthoma elasticum is a mineralization of the elastin fiber of the body, a systemic mineralization of the elastin fiber, which affects the eyes, the cardiac system, the skin, gastrointestinal, peripheral arteries as well. So it's the elastin mechanism or fiber in your body calcifies and hardens. So the direct implication by the PXE phenotype is linked to wet type age-related macular degeneration, coronary artery disease, skin wrinkling, peripheral artery disease. So some unique discoveries that we're making on this protein that's associated in a mutated form of causing pseudoxanthoma elasticum also has implications that we're discovering a partial phenotype in carriers. So it could possibly be one of the candidate genes for its contribution to cardiovascular disease and macular degeneration. PXE International, a not-for-profit company, contributed enough to the intellectual enterprise other than contributing samples. We worked in the wet lab. We worked with 2 competing groups that we published back-to-back papers in Nature Genetics with my wife as co-author on both papers to qualify as inventorship, and convincing both of those institutions to allow PXE International to be the sole patent holder and to prosecute that patent in the United States and around the world. So it gives PXE International a unique seat at the table. We take it seriously here that we're first out of the gate for a lay organization to patent a gene, that the onus is on us to do it right, and we take custodial stewardship seriously out of this gene. And it, basically all we're looking at it is license to license. And I really think that's, at the end of the day, where all of this discussion should resolve, and not around patenting, but about licensing. Licensing will ensure access, affordability, quality diagnostics, and facilitate treatment development. That's how we're using the licensing aspect of the composition of matter, which we have on this gene, and the methods patent for detecting mutations. This I'm going to just throw at you here. I would prefer to just skip it, but some of the argument, you have to understand people's worldview in the midst of some of these arguments. You know, is healthcare a right or is it a commodity? Academicians are the good guys, industry are the bad guys. You know, bioethicists and lawyers will safeguard the process. We can just step away. We can remove ourselves from the forum and the debate, or the sense that this argument is so nuanced and so complicated that the patients can know, or the lay public just doesn't know where to grasp onto any of these issues. So just let the other guys handle it. And discovery and development of these complex products will happen without patents. And I think you probably know where I stand on that. And the other thing, that genes are just so fundamentally basic and so fundamentally essential for further discovery that they should not be patented. And the argument over, you know, a gene patent, is it legal fiction or is it truly an invention? And here is, you have a gene, a wild-type gene that has a promoter area, has intronic and exonic sequences, it has other regulatory components to a gene. That's a gene in its wild-type environment, in your genome. This is how it's functioning. But actually what is patented is just the exonic sequence of that gene, or the transcribed regions of that gene, and then to commercialize it and make it usable in an artificial environment. There's usually artificial starter and regulatory sequences or vectors attached to that gene to actually make it function and used in a commercial manner, that I think it truly, in a purified form and in this artificial construct, merits inventorship. The PXE patent I just want to touch on under a rubric that we're considering non-zero sumness, that we want to manage the human prospect here of serving all of the stakeholders as best we can, but still advance along this process. And we view it as control, patient control, and stewardship for a gene, a test, options, and therapies. Patient-focused, so urgency-driven. You know, when my kids were diagnosed, I thought I had 20 years to get this accomplished. But every single day, we have 2 to 3 new patients call us. I'm 41 years old. I've lost vision in both eyes. I can't work, I can't drive, I can't read. What are you going to do for me today? What are my options? It keeps our feet to the fire and keeps things real. We view it as a gear, as a building block, to drive advancement and to drive interest that we would not necessarily have. It's access to the table. I've been in rooms, conference rooms with 22 seats in venture capital groups arguing my case for rare disease and access into some venture funds and clinical trials that I would not be in unless we had the patent. A toolkit, it's really what it is. And if you look at licensing as a toolkit and your variety of options for restrictions of field of use, non-exclusive, exclusive, reach-through access, a variety of benefit schemes, that when you say benefit schemes, immediately the industry thinks, well, you just want to line your pockets. You want a piece of the action. But benefit can be described in multiple different ways. And for different communities, it means entirely different things. Some of the times it just means capacity building. Just bring educational materials and infrastructure to our communities. And that's all we want. For us to navigate this complex pipeline of what is a drug development in the Western world, and to navigate the varying technologies that are enabling this pipeline, patenting is essential to protect each and all of these contributions to this. I would argue that we're not even in our adolescence in the biotech and drug development. We're still in messy afterbirth here because the system is horribly constructed. The rate of failure for molecules, the cost for development and managing these issues in a systems analysis is absolutely horrendous. You just throw it out and start over again. PXE International, in our benefit sharing scheme here, what we've done is partnered with these institutions in Hungary, in Italy, South America, in Europe, the United States, Hawaii, multiple US institutions, and now a public company, a tools company called Genomic, based in, it's a worldwide company. And what we're managing is centralized decentralization. Again, that lab or that science franchise model. How are we as a foundation going to return benefits to the scientific community, the patient community, and the research endeavor, raising the collective waterline for how research is conducted around the world, and do it decentralized, and not just say, okay, we have the capacity here in the United States, we have the expertise, we'll just do it here, and you can be at the end of the product life cycle here. We'll just return benefits sometimes some way down the line, and kind of just push how industry is pushing now, which is compulsory altruism. You know, patients, just hold on, we'll get there, we'll give you cures someday. But our model here is incrementally, how are we going to return benefits to everyone along the line? And we decided to go with DHPLC, a mutation detection platform that we can standardize the protocol, we can standardize the reagents, we can coordinate it all virtually online, and work in concert to optimize an assay for pseudoxanthoma elasticum. So some of the benefit sharing for the academic groups have been material funding support, facilitation to publication, that Nature Genetics back-to-back was actually brokered by PXE International. Computers, infrastructure, training, lab support, and actually supporting personnel. For Transgenomic, which is a tools company and a reagents company that wants to get into the reference lab and the kit market to see how they can change their products and bring them to a commercialization stage for clinical care, they're going to cut their teeth here on PXE International's diagnostic assay. We're going to help them navigate the FDA and the regulatory requirements Getting this diagnostic also approved and covered under a rare disease device status, which extends the patent life and their market exclusivity. So using all the tools at our disposal to make a good case why a public company should partner with a patient organization. And in this process, we're also delivering a high-end prognostic and diagnostic technology to the patient population. So in the early collection here, we're actually supplying free diagnostics, free advancing medical care and analysis of this disorder with our patient population around the world. And in the end game, deliver a better product. Again, just to we have to balance the argument here that it really is about licensing. Throwing up this red herring that licensing is an impediment, it won't work, is a fallacy, and I believe it will work. We have real examples today within the computer industry and so forth that patent pooling and organized consensus over royalty fees and charges based on a particular technology, and Affymetrix is up against the wall because they're looking at whole genomes, and if you're going to be looking at hundredths of a cent royalties on particular genes or gene fragments, and you look at it at a genome-wide basis, then the burden for profit and marketing of a technology like that is massive, and I understand that. But my perspective of the here and now and some of my lived experience through the commercialization of the genome is I'm actually seeing this as a truism and not just a marketing ploy or a fundraising ploy, that from a gene to a therapeutic is real, and it's not a fiction. What's happening, I think, right now and where genomic health is going, to think the first penetration into the public space will be molecular diagnostics, translating the understanding of a gene to a diagnostic through either disease prediction, pre-screening, characterization of existing disease, all of that. And the new landscape that's emerging now from the funding agency that, or the private funding, is that patenting on gene sequences are essential. And some would even argue patenting on ESTs or gene fragments is also essential for the idea of actually enabling workarounds. Because if you have a gene, you can't get a license, you can do a variety of other techniques to work around existing gene patents for utility in some other aspect or some other use. Moore's law is happening in the life sciences. You're getting bioinformatics, computing, coupled with robotics, wet science, or molecular understandings that are emerging now from the understanding of the genome to therapies and direct linkage from knowledge of a gene to the production of a therapeutic. And the end game here is actually turning that gene into a therapeutic itself. Everybody's favorite picture of the Kleenex of the life science industry, which is Affymetrix, and just to illustrate the problems that do exist around whole genome screens and how you're going to manage fees and royalties under that technology will be difficult, and a unique problem from a tools aspect, not from a gene patenting right or wrong aspect, but how do you manage that as a commercial product? And you'll see a variety of products emerge over the next 3 to 5 years. Specific assays for particular diseases. You see them now in R&D and in the academic circles being published and so forth. The new realm of diagnostics, which will be SNPs, single nucleotide polymorphisms, and haplotype. You have companies now that are just building functional SNP associations with disease and patenting those single SNPs across the genome for disease correlation. So it's a whole different idea of what a diagnostic or a genetic test will mean in the future. There's a whole host of companies in this space that have gotten a tremendous amount of money from the basic science of PCR and now trying to transform what they've built for an infrastructure for sequencing the genome and how they're going to apply it to the practice of medicine. And you can see in the scenario here where the value has gone down for investment in this industry and even gotten much worse than this picture, and how crucially important patents are for freedom to operate as well as barriers to keep competition and big pharma away from your ideas and products when you're especially in a resource-poor environment. This is here just to show what's happening within the life science industry and seeing the actual clinical lab environment outpacing the market tremendously, and seeing how this trend is going to pick up this genomics technology and technique and leverage it into the delivery of healthcare, the practice of medicine, and so forth. And this is just a chart showing the economic growth within the lab industry. This is an analysis done by Wheatsell Partners showing that right now there's a $1.2 billion industry in molecular diagnostics that's going to grow between 30 and 35% annually. This is an example of two targeted therapeutics, HER2/neu and BRCA/ABL for various cancer states, but the linkage and the understanding from the molecular basis of a gene and the amplifications of genes and how you build therapies and interventions against those. We're going to see more and more of that thanks to the human genome being screened and seeing thousands and thousands of similar targets being identified. And now the bottleneck is not in target identification, but how do you validate those targets and then build therapies and interventions against those. This is just an example to show that there are live examples real examples of how diagnostic screening, management of patients have direct implications on reducing healthcare costs as well as our morbidity and mortality. So the example of pushing these technologies into how we manage disease and characterize disease will have sustainable implications on the expense and the increasing expenses for disease management. Sorry to say, but the emerging trend is happening in this dysfunctional environment of managed healthcare that patient pay and a widening gap between the haves and the have-nots will exist for quite a while in the United States, and now you see Europe moving to tiered systems as well, just because of the sheer expense and the innovative products and technologies that are coming out. The system of healthcare and the system of delivery of healthcare cannot handle those products in their cost structures, so the burden is going to fall to the patient. You see, I just want to touch here on just if you imagine all of the stakeholders and all of their relationships, some of these dotted and colored lines, and how these relationships are changing. And I think the most disruptive change is when the patients become a pressurized group and start managing value that exists between the stakeholders and will not accept the trickle-down effect that the patriarchal health management and the practice of medicine in the West has set up. I don't have a lot of scholarly references for all of these trends other than a journal that I love to read, Wired Magazine's. One of their 8 Geiger trends is peer-to-peer or patient-to-patient management. This is in the British Medical Journal, where medicine is likely to change more in the next 20 years than in the last 200. I think this whole change has been enabled by IT and IS technology. With the digitizing of genomics, we'll link right into that aspect. In a larger wave and a more disruptive wave will be the consumer movement and how they adopt informatics, computing, and management of their health, and how that's going to influence this bobbing boat that's in this rough seas is the practice of medicine. Another Wired reference about the empowerment model and patients getting in the middle of the mix here and changing the industry of science. This is a big scenario here with just the typical drug development. Lila touched on this with 12 to 15 years in duration for product approval, and then another 10 years of post-market surveillance, and some estimates as high as $802 million to bring a therapeutic. I think what you need in this system is consumer involvement, patient involvement, to collapse both the timelines, the efficiencies, to manage risk, because the practice of drug development and clinical trials and everything else is becoming so risk-adverse that it's counterproductive for efficiencies. And this I just want to offer up as a solution. From my perspective, as both as a father of children with a disease and now as an industry person, that it's absolutely essential that we both codify and support the intellectual property system as it exists and support the homogenization and the leveling of the international playing field as well, to create a level playing field, because technology and patent in the history of the United States and the world has worked. It's the best and only system that's been shown to be as effective, and I think we should continue supporting it. Thank you.
We're getting our panelists back up. We ran a little bit long, but those were great presentations. we have some time for questions and answers, and I'll take the chair's prerogative and actually ask Patrick. It was kind of a great story, but actually almost an argument in the opposite direction because it couldn't be any better than what you had. And imagine what would have happened 6 years ago if Millennium had this patent or Novartis had this patent and wasn't doing anything with it and wouldn't license it.
Well, we're working with groups that are in the exact same scenario, and they've been very successful about working equivalent patent rights through contract negotiations with both institutions and industry. You have situations where Big Pharma will say, this marker, oh, this is a super marker, but it's not a billion-dollar drug. We're not going anywhere with it. It's part of our portfolio. It's part of our market cap. And there's opportunities that exist there for biotech firms just to go into these big pharma relationships and kind of pick the low-hanging fruit that's there, and there's opportunities. But it's an example where with a little passion and a little will, you can get around these so-called blocking situations because someone owns the gene.
And if it was 3 genes or 5 genes, I mean, part of your organization was you were able to create momentum. I mean, to some extent, some of the issues that Barbara was talking about are all the structures are in place to actually inhibit you from creating momentum and getting progress on one gene or one issue, or if you're talking about hypertension or diabetes or coronary artery disease, where there's 100 of these, up to where they're looking at now. Mm-hmm. When you're in that environment, yes, Novartis might be nice today, but SmithKline Beecham might really have a really great idea about what they're going to do with that product, and they may not be as accommodating.
Yeah, I would agree it's difficult, but also to remember that 17 and 20 years passes in a blink of an eye. In what it really means when you're talking about, well, here's a gene blocking patent, and we have this patient population that wants a cure that is associated with that gene. The reality is that actually develop any therapeutic intervention or any cure status whatsoever is a long, long time, very long time.
Following up on Kevin's question, I guess that there are other examples of the kind of effort that you're talking about. Golden rice, 71 distinct patented elements that were kind of brought together that was in nobody's particular interest to do it, essentially a kind of a non-profit venture. I gather now, I think around the issue of, is it tuberculosis? There's a worldwide effort led by Maria Freire, formerly of NIH, to bring, again, there with a view toward third world, again, no money in it for the companies who are holding a lot of the pieces of this puzzle. And I guess, have you been, I'm not that familiar with these efforts, but have you been in touch with those organizations to get a sense of the different levers and ways and mechanisms that you can address the sort of question that Kevin has raised, to kind of try to get these guys to play, and what was the source of leverage, presumably for some of these other organizations?
I haven't given it. Yeah, I haven't given it a lot of thought, and between my day job and my part-time job managing the research foundation, I'm very narrowly focused, and I'm blinded to a lot of things that are happening out there, and I have no comment really on those situations.
My name's Andrew Chin. I teach patent law at UNC, and I have a work in progress called Research in the Shadow of DNA Patents, where I'm developing the argument that given the increasing importance of microarrays in the discovery and sequencing and functional characterization of genes, which provide the utility in support of DNA probe patents, that at least as with regard to oligonucleotide probes, patenting may be a self-defeating exercise. I'm wondering, Barbara gave kudos to Blair Clinton and NIH, but for all their good intentions, they didn't actually invalidate any probe patents. And these probe patents are of the form, a typical probe patent claim will claim a molecule comprising 8 or more contiguous nucleotides of a disclosed gene sequence, it doesn't seem like there's a way to work around that in designing an oligonucleotide probe for an Affymetrix chip. So I just hope that rather than sort of gloss over that licensing issue, whether Barbara could give us a sense of the actual licensing problems that arose with the U-133.
Well, you know, I think what we did is we went back to the basics and went to the public database and developed the probe sequences going forward from that. So that's how we dealt with that issue. We have defensively licensed to protect ourselves from freedom to operate. It is costly because when you own a blocking patent, and I'm so glad that some people are treating the nonprofits very well, and there are good companies that are doing that, or there's very unique collaborations around really good cases for cooperative research. But when you're looking generally at whole genomic, multi-probe, multi-genic, setting the groundwork, people get very self-motivated about how they give you a license. And they have a right to do it, and they should do it, and the price is high. And the more you want it, the higher the price. And we are very sophisticated players in the licensing field. There's no two ways about it. We do it every day. I do it every day. We run, quite remarkable economic models, but there's limited resources. And if you're there first, you get a big price. And then the question is to test whether that's a right patent to have is a 10-year, approximately, $10 million outlay. And my view of this is for the public good. We have to get not only better at licensing, we have to get better at licensing pooling, and we have to get public entities involved in saying, look, if we put money in the research, then that discount for that license belongs to the general public and it goes into a pool. Now that's a pretty awesome thing for the NIH to start saying, and they really are thinking about it, but there's a couple of case studies where they didn't do that yet. So I'm arguing for, if you're going to have a pool, let's have the public policy discount, because the NIH paid for a lot of this research and will even pay, in my humble opinion, for more of it on an ongoing basis. And then you go in with that discount. And then if they want to charge you above that discount because you need it terribly, they can. But I think it's a much more complex picture of how you manage the public database, how you add things that are not in the public database that are important patents to make gene research possible. And I think we need a public entity. I mean, I don't want to sound too much like a person that believes the government can do everything, but I think they're the only people that have the horsepower and the patent reach. Actually, if you look at NIH and National Cancer Institute, it's not just NIH, but you look at both of them, to really raise this question and say, what discount are you getting? Because you used public funds to get there. Because right now there isn't one.
Alan?
I really appreciated especially some of Mr. Carey's remarks about emphasizing the consumer end of the genome. I think that's an important piece that's been left out in earlier presentations. One of your last slides, you had all of the complex players in research and development, and then you had consumers sort of cutting into the nexus and shaking things up between those components and the physician and the patient. But you still had the link to the patient being the physician. And this is what I like to question, because as I'm sure you know, there are now a lot of self-administered gene tests that you can do through the mail without benefit or otherwise of a physician. There's people having direct access to their own genomes.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is a huge change because it removes the medical gatekeeper from the final access to the technology. I think we're going to see more of this unless there's some very prohibitive regulation. At this point, there's a regulatory vacuum.
Mm-hmm.
If the laboratories that use these tests are using home brews, if they're not purchasing test kits from somebody else, it's completely unregulated. I've actually done some of these tests on myself.
Mm-hmm.
And they're growing, both pharmacogenetic tests and diagnostic tests. Is this a piece of the consumer revolution for you? Do you think it's good or do you think it's bad? It could be good or could be bad?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think it has a positive side and a dark side. But I believe that the physician or the medical establishment as a gatekeeper should be shattered. But I left the link there because they're an essential component. If if it's a partnership relationship rather than a gatekeeper patriarchal relationship that, well, unless you have, 5 concurrent prospective clinical trials, I'm not going to change the way I practice medicine. But I'm sorry, but there's, after the second confirmatory clinical trial that shows that this drug has efficacy and a low profile of risk for me as a patient, I should have the ability to make the decision to avail myself of that. Right, and you saw that with ERISA this past week with the FDA, was struggling with, are we the gatekeepers, or are we lower our threshold for efficacy and allow patients that have no alternative to gain access?
Great.
Yes, this is David
sir.
Resnick from East Carolina University School of Medicine. I'd like to address the licensing problem again and point out that I don't think it's really genes that are very unique here, because all the many steps are going to, for instance, the next step is protein patents and the fight over the licensing of proteins. So it's hard to say we could rope off genes and say, oh, well, that's where all the licensing problems are. This is a basic molecule. Let's just not patent the genes, because you do that and then the fight will go to proteins, or the fight will go to the other molecules that we need in biotechnology. And that's why I don't think you can really rope off the genes, but clearly you need to do something to help promote cross-licensing and licensing in the industry. Maybe a private effort will work. I think we all know that some of this has worked in terms of copyright law. We've had a lot of problems with development in the music industry many years ago and licensing there. So maybe a private effort, but I think the same thing is going to come up with proteins as well. Can someone address, protein licensing and patents? Someone like to touch on that?
Well, I think it's a very good point. You could make your point anywhere along the research area, and blocking patents. The thing about proteins is they have the same problem. If a protein is involved in a number of processes that need to be looked at, you could have a blocking. Exactly the same analysis as genes. The thing that struck me when you look down, though, is that if the research goes the way it seems to be going, the utility for a particular type of disease, if it's very refined, it's really about reinforcing how you get a protein patent for a particular type of disease. If that's handled well, we're not going to have the same kind of issues we had with genes. But overall, you're quite right. I just think the utility, because it's more provable what's going to be going on there. Now, what I fear for proteins is that if there's a protein that comes from that it's exuded by a specific gene and somebody owns the gene, you're back to the gene problem. So you have to start the intervention somewhere. I do agree with you. We may need to have a protein patent pool to do the appropriate research. You're quite right. It's a solution. But who manages it? How do you price it on the economics? And how do you know what you need when as you go downstream, the proteins develop? Now, that's a process question, and I think if we put our minds to it, we'd be a lot further along, but you don't hear that same mechanism being talked about, at least I don't. And I sit in the middle of a lot of research projects about, well, let's all throw our proteins together and pay each other, what, 1%? On research, on pure research, that there won't be a product coming from for 10 years? I mean, that's the other side of the how long it takes to get an intervention argument. What are you paying on, and how can you pay?
Dr. Pepper?
Yeah, I've heard all three of you in your arguments, and a lot of your arguments are based around you have to do this out of defense because of the existing structure. Affymetrix has wonderful patents on technology, but doesn't like to be interfered with people who have patents on individual genes. Affymetrix would clearly be better off if there were no gene patents whatsoever. Mr. Terry made a very compelling story about his very commendable exercise as a patient advocate, but I think confuses it with his role as a biotech entrepreneur in sort of worshiping up a false god with gene patents, thinking that will get to a cure or a test faster. That's sort of the notion that it is driven by the investment community, so I can understand where you got those notions. But in general, in my experience, which is more than many with gene patent issues, gene patents seem to inhibit research in commercial settings. Unless you happen to own it, then you know, Affymetrix is very happy with its technology patents, wants to vigorously enforce those, but if somebody else had them, they wouldn't be quite so happy. So beauty is in the eye of the beholder in the case of patents. All the goals that Mr. Terry set out for his foundation, trying to get to a faster cure and even fast, cheap diagnostics, would be obviously far better met if there were no intellectual property rules at all. From your comment on home brew assays, that's the route to rapid diagnostics. You don't need FDA approval. And the cost of the test would be far cheaper if they didn't have to pay for your patents and didn't have to pay for FDA approval. The question is, and the same issues do apply to proteins. And so, you know, patents are not inherently bad. They do promote and motivate research. But the question is what they're applied for. I don't think there's any disagreement that people want to have patents on therapeutics, but the argument that if you patent a target, that's going to help get to a therapeutic, I think has been proven wrong over and over again. Big Pharma totally ignores them. I give you one wonderful example of an EST that turned into a major gene patent for HGS and Smith-Kline-Beecham that led to them going after a major clinical drug that Merck, working with Axis Pharmaceuticals, took that same gene, cloned it in Canada, and did their research up there to avoid the gene patent, and actually beat Smith-Kline-Beecham, you know, towards going into clinical trials. You don't want to inhibit people or having to have them go to unusual means to develop the therapeutic. Your challenge, in Mr. Terry's case, is trying to get the pharmaceutical industry to pay attention at all to your disease, because they're really not going to care about it because there's not a market for it in their view, where they cut off at roughly $500 million a year in a product. So I think people need to refocus on not whether patents are good or bad, but what should be patented and what applications should be patented. And I think with diagnostics, we're going down a route that will collapse sooner than later, whether it's proteins or DNA diagnostics. So I'm sure you all have counters to that you'd like to defend, but I thought I'd just throw those comments out.
Well, you know, I think we've all learned a lot, and I'm sure you have too in our years in this business, but you have to start the debate somewhere. And, you know, we at Affymetrix decided to start it at genes, but it's definitely applicable to proteins as well. And I think your point about, you know, driving research to other countries, for example, because our patent laws look at it a certain way is very well taken. And I agree with you. We should have a discussion at some point over the weekend of what can you patent. If you look at the commerce of the genome, just look at it as a commerce. If you looked at that and you said, what shall we patent that would get us all the most breadth in this stream of commerce and accomplish getting the most therapeutics on the table? And the problem with that is a tough crystal ball to look into, because we have yet even to focus on what the diseases are and whether our paradigms about diseases are accurate. So I agree with your approach.
I would disagree completely with your characterization of what I'm doing, because the end game is to be successful and to change the potential outcome of my children's disorder. And for me, coming and speaking about patents, I could care less. Setting normative ethics around patents and the implementation, I could care less. Going to forums and arguing about this, I could care less. It's a matter of getting to a solution, and I'm going to use every tool, every system network that I can use to get there, and to break the rules properly along the way here. And I'm not worshiping any god, any patent. It's a necessary evil that I've been thrust into the spotlight because we've patented it. But it's the passion and the final effort at the end of the day that's going to make the difference, and not big pharma, not small biotech, not this ethic or that ethic. Doesn't matter.
What would not have been achieved in your case that sequence in the public domain to make it non-patentable?
With monogenic diseases, rare monogenic diseases, you can see a trail of failures. After the cloning of the gene, research interest stops. There's no commercial enterprise. There's no reward system. There's no application at all or continued interest. It loses its sexiness. The patent for the PXE gene has allowed us to continue the sexy profile. I've been able to sell it to a tools company that wants to become a reference lab and a kit diagnostic company for market advantage and do a business transformation. So the patent has directly related to keep the MRP6 gene sexy until I can prove its linkage and its biological pathways to skin wrinkling, to peripheral vascular disease, wet type macular degeneration, the experimental clinical trial I'm running with Genzyme now, the one we're talking about running with Genentech. Once I make the other biological linkages associated with this gene patent, it stays sexy, and I continue down the pipeline.
Alex?
I had a brief question for Barbara. I'm not sure whether this was a slip or you intended to say it, but you suggested that it was important for Affymetrix to have the entire 3 billion base pair genome sequence. I'd like to know why.
It's important for us, we believe. I mean, and again, we have a particular type of microscope where we think that if you believe there's multi-gene effects, then you have to be able to look not just at, a piece over here and a piece over there, that the real benefit of having this microscope is to look at the whole genome, not all of rat together, all of mouse together, all of human. Now, that is a perfectly legitimate way to look at a particular piece of research. You know what? It's caught. I think we're going to see in the next year, and science is what it is. That what people think are junk, what is called, the dark outer spaces of the genes, may not be so dark as people think.
Thesis brooded about almost every week since the biotech community got the government to fund the entire sequence. But I've never seen any significant scientific suggestion that there is something to this stuff besides junk. Every week they say, we're going to discover that it's not junk, and that's why we have to get the government to do what we are not interested in doing ourselves.
Well, I fundamentally disagree in the sense that, we'll wait and see what the dark matter of the genome really holds, is what they're calling it right now when you get down to the, constructs of the protein and the multigenic relationships. But, I don't think we have an argument over the science. I think, I'm just saying we have a way of doing it. It's been very helpful to a lot of research institutions, including universities, as well as for-profit research institutions, and it's worked so far. And we can take pieces of the genome just as easily as we can take the whole genome once somebody decides what they want to look at, and do it very, very effectively. But what I'm saying is, at this point in time, for using this microscope, we can't look at it one gene at a time. And we'll learn whether it should be 5 genes at a time, 10 genes at a time, or the whole genome. But to prohibit somebody from looking at the whole genome because of an impact of a legal construct may be a scientific error. That's all I'm saying.
Well, I really want to thank the panelists for joining us here today. This was a quick session.